Somewhere ahead of us, a river is about to disappear into a wall of stone 1,500 feet high. This is the Boquillas Canyon Trail in the far southeastern corner of Big Bend National Park in Texas, and it may be the only hike in America where the soundtrack is a man singing to you from another country. The river beside us is the Rio Grande, and the far bank is Mexico. In the next mile and a half, we will walk past 100 million years of ocean floor, look across the water at a village that once shipped silver over the river on a steel cable, and stand at the mouth of the longest canyon in the park. It is January, the desert is cool and bright, and the trail is waiting. First, let us get oriented. The Rio Grande flows southeast out of the Rocky Mountains, and in far west Texas it makes a huge U-shaped turn, first southeast, then abruptly northeast. That turn is the Big Bend that gives this country its name, and tucked inside it is Big Bend National Park, more than 800,000 acres of the Chihuahuan Desert. For 118 miles, the river forms both the southern edge of the park and the international border between the United States and Mexico. We are at the far eastern end of that line, near Rio Grande Village, where a short spur road ends at the Boquillas Canyon trailhead. Beyond the parking lot, there is nothing but river, rock, and sky. The hike itself is short and friendly. The trail runs not quite a mile and a half out and back, with less than 300 feet of climbing, and it is rated easy. It starts with the biggest work of the day, a switchbacking climb up this low limestone hill, on pale rock worn smooth by decades of boots. On a January morning like this one, the air is cool and comfortable, though in summer this is one of the hottest corners of the park, where the river country can pass 110 degrees. Winter is exactly the right season to be here. Big Bend became a national park on June 12, 1944, the first national park in Texas, after the state spent years assembling hard-scrabble ranch land and handed it to the nation in the middle of the Second World War. Today, the park protects more than 1,200 species of plants, about 75 kinds of mammals, and more than 450 species of birds, one of the richest bird lists of any national park in the country. It is also one of the most remote parks in the lower 48, hours of driving from the nearest city. That remoteness kept the land wild long enough to be saved. It is why so much of what we will see today still looks the way it did a century ago. From the top of the hill, the Rio Grande is right below us, and it is worth pausing on what this river is. Everything on the far bank, sometimes just a stone throw away, is the state of Coahuila, Mexico. The border here is not a fence or a wall. It is the deepest part of the channel, a line drawn in moving water. Herons fish both banks without paperwork, and the canyon wren's song carries across without a passport. Few national parks anywhere sit this intimately against an international boundary. And for most of today, the only reminder will be a voice, but we will get to that. Here is a strange fact about the water below us. By the time the Rio Grande reaches Big Bend, so much of its flow has been taken for cities and farms upstream that the original river has nearly run dry. Most of the water sliding past this trail actually arrives from Mexico, delivered by the Rio Conchos, which pours out of the Sierra Madre and joins the Rio Grande upstream of the park. Some say that below that junction, it is really a new river wearing an old name. So the current that carved the canyon ahead of us is an international collaboration. Two countries share the border, and two countries fill the river. And from up here we get our first real look at where we are going. Downstream, the river runs straight at a mountain front and simply vanishes into it, a dark slot in a wall of banded limestone. That wall is the edge of the Sierra del Carmen, and the slot is the mouth of Boquillas Canyon. Behind us, the floodplain is soft and green with river cane, and across the water, the rooftops of a small village catch the sun. Take a moment here, because this is one of the great stand and stare views in Texas. The Sierra del Carmen deserves an introduction. It is a northern finger of the Sierra Madre Oriental, running about 45 miles southeast from the river into Coahuila and rising to almost 9,000 feet, high enough to trade desert scrub for cool forests of pine and fir. Its western face is a great limestone escarpment lifted along a fault, and at sunset it famously glows in bands of rose and violet. On the Mexican side, much of the range is protected as the Maderas del Carmen, a reserve created in 1994, part of which was later declared the first designated wilderness area in Latin America. Together with Big Bend, it forms a corridor of connected wild country on both sides of the border, and the canyon we are walking toward is the river doorway through this range. All of this stone began underwater. More than 100 million years ago, in the Cretaceous period, a warm, shallow sea spread across the middle of North America, and this corner of Texas lay beneath it. Generation after generation of shellfish, corals, and microscopic creatures lived, died, and drifted to the bottom, and their remains compacted into layer upon layer of limestone, thousands of feet of it. The banded cliffs ahead of us are that sea floor, stacked like pages in a book. When you put your hand on the canyon wall later, you are touching the bed of a vanished ocean. Down the far side of the hill, the trail drops onto the floodplain, and the walking turns soft and sandy. The path threads between stands of giant river cane, a bamboo-like grass that grows in thick green screens along the banks. Mesquite and seep willow fill the gaps, and after the bare limestone above, the river bottom feels almost lush. This narrow green ribbon is an oasis, and the desert wildlife knows it. Watch the sand for tracks, because coyote, javelina, and great blue heron all sign the trail register here. Now, how does a river cut through a mountain range instead of flowing around it? The answer is patience. The Rio Grande was flowing across this country before the mountains reached their present height, and as the land along the faults slowly rose, the river held its course and sawed downward, grain by grain, flood by flood. The rock came up, the river cut down, and the result is a slot 1,500 feet deep through solid limestone. Geologists call a river like this antecedent, which simply means it was here first. The canyon is not a crack the river found, it is a passage the river made. Back on the flat, the canyon mouth grows with every step, and the scale starts to register. What looked like a neat dark doorway from the hilltop is now a gateway hundreds of feet tall, and we are still not at its foot. The river slides toward it, smooth and unhurried, the color of milky jade. Sound changes down here too, because the cliffs ahead catch every noise and fold it back, so the river seems to get louder as the walls close in. Every visitor seems to walk this stretch a little faster. The name Boquillas is Spanish, and it means little mouths. No one wrote down exactly what the namers had in mind, but stand here and the guesses make themselves. The narrow mouth of the canyon swallowing the river, or the small spring mouths and openings that pierce these limestone walls. The name attached itself to everything in the neighborhood, the canyon, a village, a historic post office, and even, as we will hear later, a rock formation known to science. Spanish, English, and older languages before them are all layered into the map here. Every name in this landscape is a little piece of history doing quiet work. Big Bend has three great river canyons: Santa Elena in the west, Mariscal at the bottom of the bend, and Boquillas here in the east, and Boquillas is the longest of the three. Exactly how long is a surprisingly slippery question, because the canyon opens and narrows in stages, and estimates run from about 5 miles to 17 or more depending on where you decide it ends. Its walls rise as much as 1,500 feet above the water. Unlike the single sheer slot of Santa Elena, Boquillas is a long, winding trench through the whole body of the Sierra del Carmen, and boaters who run it describe days of stone corridors with the sky reduced to a bright ribbon overhead. We will only stand in its doorway today, but even the doorway is unforgettable. And here it is. The trail curls around a last bend and the walls simply stand up, banded gray and gold, climbing away until you have to tip your head all the way back. The river fills most of the floor, so the path squeezes along a sandy bench between water and rock. On the far side, the Mexican wall rises just as sheer, close enough that the canyon feels like a hallway between nations. Swallow's Cut arcs through the shadow line high above. This is the turnaround point of the official trail, and nobody turns around quickly. Look at the base of the cliff on our side and you will see something odd. A tall, smooth slope of pale sand banked against the rock like a snowdrift. The park points to it as one of the youngest geologic features in Big Bend, a modern wind-blown dune still being built today. Winds funnel down the canyon, pick up dry sand from the river bars, and stall where the wall bends, dropping their load in the same sheltered corner year after year. So in one glance you can see both ends of the park geologic story, 100-million-year-old sea floor overhead and a dune younger than the trail beneath it. The climb up the sand is brutal, and the run down takes about 4 seconds. Upstream of the canyon, on the Mexican bank, sits the village we glimpsed from the hill, Boquillas del Carmen. It is a scatter of brightly painted houses, a church, a school, and a couple of restaurants, home to roughly 200 people. The nearest sizable Mexican town lies well over 100 miles away across the desert, so the village has always faced north, toward the river and its visitors. Tourism is the principal industry today, and daily life moves to the rhythm of hikers and river crossers from the park. But this quiet place began with a bang, because under the Sierra del Carmen there was silver. In the early 1890s, prospectors found silver in the Sierra del Carmen, along with lead and zinc, and Boquillas boomed. At its height, the mining settlement held somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 people, a real town in one of the emptiest corners of the continent. Ore came down out of the mountains and was smelted by the riverbank near the village before heading north for processing. For a couple of decades, this stretch of the Rio Grande, which feels today like the end of the earth, was an industrial landscape of furnaces, freight, and paydays. Then in 1919, the mining stopped, and the town began a long, quiet fade. The boldest piece of that era still leaves traces on the American side. To move ore across the river, the mining companies strung an aerial tramway over the Rio Grande, steel cable and hanging buckets marching on towers up out of the valley toward the distant railhead. Imagine standing on this quiet trail a century ago and watching buckets of silver ore sail overhead from one country into another. Ruins of the old ore terminal and its rusted cables can still be found in the desert hills east of Rio Grande village. When the mines closed, the buckets stopped, and the desert began patiently taking the ironwork apart. It is still at it. Along this stretch of trail, you may notice small displays set out on the rocks, wire scorpions and roadrunners, embroidered cloth, painted walking sticks, each with a jar for payment. They are made in the village across the river and left here on trust. The park asks visitors not to buy them inside the park, and the sanctioned way to shop is to cross legally and buy in the village itself, where the same crafts support the same families. However you feel about the little jars, they say something true about this border. It runs through the middle of the river, but daily life has always flowed across it. For many years, the unofficial voice of this trail belonged to a man named Victor Valdez. He would station himself on the Mexican bank, and as hikers came around the bend, his songs would come rolling across the water, old Mexican ballads delivered at full heart, with a tip jar waiting on the American side. Park visitors knew him simply as the Singing Man of Boquillas, and for a generation his voice was as much a part of this canyon as the swallows. Victor died in 2016 at 65, and the news traveled far beyond his village. But the tradition did not go with him, because on many days a voice still drifts across the river here, another villager singing to the canyon, and the canyon, as always, singing it back. Past the dune, the bench narrows, and the trail fades out where rock finally meets water. This is as far as feet can go, because beyond here the canyon belongs to boats. Floaters put in near the village crossing and take days to thread the canyon and the wild country below it. Standing here you can feel the pull of that downstream shadow, the river sliding away between walls that will not open again for miles. We will let it go without us, since some doors are worth standing in even if you never walk through. The the village across the river has lived one more drama in living memory. For generations, park visitors crossed informally by rowboat to eat lunch in Boquillas, and the village lived on that traffic. After the attacks of September 11th, the crossing was shut down in May of 2002, and the effect was devastating, with the population falling toward 100 as families left to find work. It took 11 years, but in April of 2013, the United States opened an official port of entry here, and the boats returned. Today, travelers with a passport ride a rowboat over for a few dollars, and in a recent year, more than 11,000 visitors made the crossing. Since 2015, a solar farm has powered the village, and its population has climbed back above 200. Heading back along the river, it is worth thinking about how rare this arrangement is. Here, at one of the most heavily discussed borders on Earth, a national park and a small Mexican village keep up a friendship measured in rowboats and lunch counters. Rangers count the crossing among the most memorable experiences the park offers, and the village restaurant tables fill with hikers still dusty from this trail. Borders are usually described from far away in capitals. Down here at river level, the description is simpler: neighbors on opposite banks of the same water. People found this river doorway long before any border existed. Archaeologists trace human presence in the Big Bend country back roughly 10,000 years, to hunters and gatherers who camped along the river oasis and left hearths, stone tools, and rock art in the desert. Much later, in the 1800s, the Great Comanche Trail crossed this region, a broad beaten route used by mounted Comanche parties riding south into Mexico each autumn. Spanish, Mexican, and American newcomers then added their own trails and names on top of the old ones. The paved road and this sandy path are only the latest layers on a very old map. Science has borrowed the name Boquillas too. In 1907, a geologist named J.A. Udden described the layered rocks near the old Boquillas post office, and the Boquillas Formation has carried the name ever since. It is a stack of thin limestones and marls seasoned with beds of volcanic ash, laid down in the late Cretaceous, roughly 90 million years ago. Its layers are crowded with sea life, coiled ammonites, huge flat clams, oyster beds, shark teeth, and even bones of mosasaurs, the great marine reptiles of that age. The canyon walls above us are older still, the massive limestones of an earlier, deeper chapter of the same sea. Walking here in the low January light, the canyon puts on a quiet show. The sun never gets high this time of year, so the walls trade bands of gold and shadow all day, and the river carries the colors downstream in long, wavering streaks. Canyon wrens sound their falling laugh from the cliffs, one of the signature sounds of the desert Southwest. There is no rush on this trail and no reason to invent one. The best tool on a hike like this is a willingness to stop. The wildlife story here has a remarkable recent chapter. Black bears were wiped out of this part of Texas by the middle of the 20th century, gone along with much of the region's big wildlife. Then, in the late 1980s, bears began appearing in the park again, and biologists traced them to the Sierra Del Carmen, whose wild highlands had sheltered a population all along. The bears had walked back into the United States on their own, crossing the river and the desert through the same binational corridor of protected country we looked at earlier. Add the park list of more than 450 recorded bird species, and you have one of the wildest corners of Texas, and one that owes part of its wildness to Mexico. The river itself carries a federal honor here. In 1978, a long ribbon of the Rio Grande along and below the park was added to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, a designation reserved for free-flowing rivers with outstanding natural character. The protected stretch includes Boquillas Canyon and the remote lower canyons beyond it, some of the loneliest navigable water in the lower 48. Of the great canyons here, Boquillas is the easy one to meet, a paved road, a short trail, and you are standing in it. Almost anyone who can walk a sandy mile can stand inside a wild and scenic canyon before lunch. Stay past sunset in this country, and a second landscape appears overhead. Big Bend was certified as an International Dark Sky Park in 2012 at the Gold Tier, the rating for skies nearly free of light pollution, and it remains one of the darkest places in the continental United States. On a moonless night, the Milky Way stands over the Sierra Del Carmen like a lit road, and the canyon mouth becomes a black gate under a ceiling of stars. Even the village lights across the river are few and low. The same remoteness that once doomed the mines now protects the night itself. Climbing back over the little hill, the whole afternoon is laid out one more time. The green floodplain, the slow jade river, the village dozing in the sun, and the great banded wall with its dark door. It is a short trail by any measure, and yet we have crossed 100 million years and brushed against two countries without ever leaving the path. That is the particular magic of Boquillas, big history through a small door. The sand will hold our footprints for a day or two, and then the wind will file them away with everything else. So that is the Boquillas Canyon Trail, a mile and a half at the bottom of Texas that holds a vanished sea, a silver boom, a singing border, and the longest canyon in Big Bend. If your travels bring you to this far corner of the park, give it an unhurried hour, and if the crossing is open, consider lunch in the village, where the rowboat ride is a memory you will keep. The river that made all of this is still at work below the cliffs, patient as ever. From the mouth of Boquillas Canyon on the Rio Grande, safe travels. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.